on this earth, but our lives share a common destiny as we walk together. In a time of crisis or in a time of peace, this is a story of 8 billion beating hearts. We share this one fragile planet, the air we breathe, the land we walk on, and the oceans we swim in. Imagine borders that surround us, some more fortified than others. Borders for many of us define our lives today. For global capital and those with the right passports, borders are easy. For the global masses, these borders tell us where we can and cannot go. For the world's 2 billion Muslims, 1 out of every 4 people on this earth, our lives are interconnected by the diaspora of our hearts, of our families, and a spiritual lineage that stretches back 14 centuries. But we are only told stories that put us in boxes to police our identities. What if the full story was told about our faith, about our lives, about our cultures, the story of our love for humanity, and our stories as protectors of the world? This is for the future builders, the dreamers, those who want to escape from the futility of generations past destroying our shared world. Media has been built to divide us. We ask, what if it was built to connect? This is a manifesto written across screens. We need you. Beyond languages, beyond cultures, beyond faiths, beyond all barriers and borders, we need each other. This is for all of us.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to the Global Muslim Film Festival. I'm Dustin Cron, the founder of the Center for Global Muslim Life. It's a real blessing today talking about the diaspora of hearts. We're blessed to have my brother Mustafa Davis all the way with us from Istanbul, Turkey. We wanted to start by thanking our sponsors, Penny Appeal, who's the title sponsor. We couldn't have done it without Penny Appeal. Thank you all so much. Please check out Penny Appeal's websites, Penny Appeal UK, Penny Appeal USA, South Africa, etc. And our community sponsors, Amana Mutual Funds, Trust, and the American Muslim Community Foundation. Again, thank you to all our sponsors. This is a really beautiful conversation today, and we'll bring in Mustafa. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. How are you, Habib?
Alhamdulillah. Great to see you. Well, Mustafa Davis was born and raised in the Bay Area in Northern California and studied filmmaking at the New York Film Academy. Mustafa's work has been showcased on MTV, PBS, BBC, The Atlantic, and international television networks. He's taught master classes in film and photography in the USA, Canada, the United Kingdom, all over the world. And he currently runs a creative studio and media training program in Istanbul, where he lives with his wife and 4 children. MashaAllah, and I think more than anything for so much of us, you're also just a big inspiration for our careers, for so many of us as media producers, and for myself included. I remember spending time with you in the Bay Area, seeing how you would work, seeing how seriously you take your faith and your spirituality and your studies, and also as a media producer. So yeah, man, it's an honor to have you with us here in the film festival today. Let's start there. What do you think about this idea of global Muslim film and the way that we're trying to bring together these set of films from around the world to really show that we have one global film market that Muslims are consuming from around the world?
I love it. Alhamdulillah. It's something that I think, we've been lacking as a community for a long time. Something, you and I have talked about in the past as well. But, I've been blessed to teach film in many places all over the world, and you're hard pressed to find those films later. Like, this great filmmakers, up and coming filmmakers, you're hard pressed to find them because we don't have a centralized place for Muslims to showcase their work. So, you've seen me post about this initiative. You and I have talked about it. I'm fully supportive of it, behind it. I think it's great. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah, thank you so much for all your support. And I wanted to dive into a conversation we were having yesterday and throughout the film festival that's really about spirituality in film. And when I think about your work, your films have moved me spiritually in very impactful ways. And I can think of like even even as like institutional clips, like the clip you made of with Dr. Omar and Imam Zaid about Malcolm X, I remember is one of my favorite clips about Malcolm X of all time. And if you think about all the media production that exists about Malcolm, there's very little that actually talks about him as a spiritual figure, right? And so can you talk about this idea of spirituality in film, and when you as a filmmaker make a film, how do you convey the spiritual in your filmmaking, and what are some examples that you go to for when you think of this idea of spirituality in film?
MashaAllah. No lead-in questions, huh, Dustin?
Yeah, no, we're not playing.
Just going straight to it. Spirituality in film. Just to have an honest, candid conversation, I don't know how to separate the two. And part of it is just my trajectory into filmmaking. You know, I started photography at a very young age. I think I was 11 years old when I picked up my first camera. My stepfather was an amateur photographer. And so I learned how to, develop film and work with film at a very, very young age. Film wasn't something that I was really interested in, or I didn't know I was interested in. I wanted to be a writer. Really, I wanted to be a painter because my mother's a painter, but I'm horrible at painting. My family today still makes fun of me when I draw or when I attempt to draw. So, at a very young age, I started in photography, photojournalism. I started to work as a photojournalist. And then, my father, when I was younger, had a video store business. And so that's when I just started to consume film rather than do my homework. I was just consuming at some points 3 to 4 films a day. And then I fell in love with the documentary genre at that point. And so I started watching a lot of documentary films. And I think it was at that point when I decided that this is maybe something that I wanted to do as a career. And I have a father who's an entrepreneur. And so his mantra was always do what you love and the money will follow. And if it doesn't follow, at least you spent your life doing what you love. And so I followed that mantra. And then I converted to Islam in 1996. And then after I converted to Islam, I was told by a good portion of people around me that photography was impermissible in Islam. So I got rid of my cameras and I stopped doing photography for probably 3 to 4 years. I stopped completely. And then, as I was going about my studies, I had been to Mauritania. I traveled to Damascus for a year, to Fez for a short while, Sudan. And then we settled as a family in Yemen for about 4 years. And it was there, when I was there actually studying Arabic and studying Islamic sciences with an emphasis in fiqh. It was in the middle of my studies that I was told that one of my teachers wanted me to move to the UAE and help him with some media production for a research foundation that he was starting there. And so I went to my teacher, Habib Omar bin Hafid. At the time I was studying in Dar al-Mustafa, and kind of complained. I said, they want me to go to Abu Dhabi, but I don't want to go. And he said, no, we see an inclination in you in the arts, in media. And so we're going to push you in this direction. And then, so for me, it ended up being my teachers, my sheikh, if you will, that ended up sending me to film school. And so I went to film school after studying abroad for a number of years. I went back to the United States. I studied at New York Film Academy. And then I went back to the UAE and started working in film and television in Abu Dhabi for a while. So for me, because I was on a path to seek knowledge and making no claims of ever getting anywhere near achieving that, but that was my goal at least. But while I was on that path, I was diverted in another direction. It was my teachers who did that. So I've never had this angst that I think a lot of young aspiring Muslim artists have, of this kind of taboo nature that there seems to be concerning the arts in Islam. Is photography permissible? Is music permissible? Is dance permissible? Can you do these things as a practicing Muslim? Can you show these things on screen if you're a filmmaker? I've never had that struggle because I've always had my teachers behind me, and they were the ones who pushed me in the arts. They saw that inclination and they pushed me in the arts. So I didn't have that same trepidation that a lot of artists have, and I think it's a very real thing, especially in the intimate conversations that I've had with people. It's a very real thing. It causes a lot of angst for them, In fact, one of my first feature-length documentary films I made was about this. It was about Muslim artists working in hip hop, who were using their art in some way for da'wah, in some way to proselytize the religion of Islam. And in that film it's called Deen Tight, and it came out in, I think, 2008. We came out with it, and it was actually produced by my same teachers who sent me to film school. It was funded by them, and it was an exploration, kind of Muslims who were in the art scene before it became accepted to be in the art scene. And in that film, you can see some of the struggle that some of the artists have because they don't have a sanctioning by their scholars. So for me, this is a long, verbose way for me to say I don't actually have an answer to the question, because it's not been something that I've really pondered or thought about, because the two have never been separate to where I'd have to consider what it means to have spirituality and art together, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's the best answer of the film festival, mashallah, because it's not the secular sacred divide that we as Muslims live our sacred selves, and that manifests in our work. And I think that film to me is foundationally a spiritual art form. It's literally the attempt at manipulating light. So how could it not be spiritual? But of course, the stories and the intention behind it have to do with what gets manifested on film. And I think that, let's reflect and just be real here also. The Ba'alawi have always spread Islam in a way where the arts were a part of that. Mm-hmm. And like if you look at the Wali Songo as an example, the great saints who spread Islam throughout Java and to what is now the largest Muslim population on the planet, these Javanese saints were considered, many of them were poets, right? They used poetry and storytelling in a way to teach Islam. So I think, mashallah, Habib Omar is a great master. And it's funny, I've had people reach out to me during this film festival, bro, what are you doing? Why would you have, with the first film, one of the first films of the festival was the film about Qawwali music in Pakistan, really beautiful film. And someone reached out to me, why are you doing this? And I'm like, bro, I don't have these debates, and I'm not going to debate you. My teachers have told me what I can and can't do, and that's who I follow. I don't follow you. So mashallah, that's really beautiful. And I remember going back to Habib Omar, I remember we once, the one time he came to the United States, he came to California, and you all were touring with him throughout his whole tour throughout North America, making a film, I think, for a Canadian television station. And it was really incredible to see you guys filming, because there's two different types of films here, right? One that within what we're talking about. One is the conveying spiritual messages in what might be considered a more mundane subject. And then there's the very difficult work of filming a very spiritual gathering and attempting to allow the audience to have some feeling of that dhawq, that spiritual tasting that's going on within that gathering. And I remember one of the highest energy gatherings with Habib Omar towards the end of the trip in the Bay Area. There was so much happening. The energy was so high. And at some point, you guys just put down your cameras. And I was cracking up because I was like, how do you film someone like Habib Omar and try to convey what's happening spiritually?
And sometimes you don't, right? And in that situation, we couldn't. My son Muhammad, both of my sons are here with me, and they'll come on with me in just a bit. But my son Muhammad was there, and he stopped filming, I think, first before anyone, and he was just partaking in the in the vibe of the moment. I remember that gathering very well. Alhamdulillah. Sometimes you don't, and I think that comes, I think, with training as a documentary filmmaker. There's times where there's times where not filming is a better choice than filming. And I was doing a film on orphans in Malawi in I think 2007. We were there shooting, and that's a very difficult situation to film in. In fact, the first orphan that we cast for our film, we went on a scouting trip and met the people and met some of the people the characters that we'd be filming with in this documentary. And so we cast one of the children in the film. His name was Steven. And by the time we got back 3 weeks later to film, he had passed away from unfortunately from HIV AIDS complications. But we were there filming, and there was a point where we were at one of the hospitals, one of the local hospitals, and it was just so chaotic, and the level of need that was there, and there was only one doctor in the entire hospital, and I think 3 nurses. And so at some point we stopped filming, and we spent the rest of the afternoon just kind of helping out how we could. And so I think that training is applied also to filming with spiritual people, with scholars. And it's something that we teach in some of our documentary film training courses is when do you put the camera down, and when do you focus and keep going to get your shot.
Yeah, and so with that, let's go to the main subject of this, which I think relates this idea of what is the future of global Muslim media, because we've seen things transition and change so much, in the 20 years even that you've been doing this work. And I remember some of those. I watched some of these DVDs that you helped make, mashallah, when I was first entered Islam. Back in the day of DVDs with like Habib Ali's trip to California, and so now we're at a point where like the film that you guys made, one of the films you made this Ramadan for Madina Institute, is this gorgeous film of B-roll and Sheikh Mukhtar Margrawi talking about Islam. And then we talked offline before this about Omar Suleiman's series about angels, right? Is something that's really cutting edge in terms of really high, and he sent us a video for the Ramadan Awards last weekend where he really got into that, right? Most people wouldn't think that a sheikh is being scripted by his staff, but he was talking about the script writers. He was talking about the depth of what went into that type of production. So where do you see this going? The work that you're doing there, Madina Institute in Istanbul, where do you see the future of Muslim media going?
I think we're in an interesting age, and especially right now, over these last 3 months with this pandemic crisis, hitting the world, everybody's gone online now, and everyone has got some type of camera, and people are doing some type of show, whether it's live streaming or just kind of talking to their audience. And so I think whether we like it or not, media production and us owning and telling our own stories and owning the platforms and having the ability to get our stories directly to an audience is something new and not something that we've had before. Like you mentioned, like these DVDs when we first started. And I think the first DVD that we ever produced, it was for when we founded Guidance Media back then with Hassan Sidki and my good friends Hassan Sidki and Khalil Moore back in the early 2000s. The very first DVD that we ever produced, the title of it was just Jihad. It was Jihad on the top of the cover. It was a discourse that Habib Ali Jeffrey gave at Santa Clara University in the Bay Area with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf translating. And even back then, when you created a DVD, there was no way to get people to watch it. And so we were, selling DVDs after Jummah out of the trunks of our cars. We were going to Islamic conferences, trying to get the word out and get people to see it then. Whereas now, you can create something. We're doing it right now. We're doing something live, and we're putting out content immediately to a selected audience. You didn't have that ability 20 years ago. The internet speeds were not fast enough to be able to broadcast video like this. So it's exciting. We've also moved to a time where the way that the arts were taboo, I think in the late 90s and the early 2000s, is that as artists, those early artists back in the 90s, and obviously I'm talking about, in our era. For me, when I say early, I mean early because I converted to Islam in 1996. And so anything 96, 97, that's early for me. And so at that point, there weren't a lot of Muslim media companies either there. I think you had Mountain of Light, you had Starlatch Press, you had Alhambra Productions. I don't even think you had Astrolabe then. You had Adam's World, and there was a few around the world where you could get Islamic material. Whereas now it's direct to viewer, and so and with that happening in terms of technology increasing, and then with the kind of discourse concerning the arts in Islam having a different place in our community now, to where you're not fighting with whether or not I can actually even make a film. When I was screening Dean Tight, it was still early for films, especially at that level and that level of honesty and discourse, I think. And so we had boycotts. There was a picket line for my film when I screened it in Birmingham in the United Kingdom. When I was in New Zealand, there was an entire 2 rows of the audience walked out of the film at a certain point. And some of this was because of not liking the content of the film, and some of it was just because it was a film that was about music and musicians in general. But now you fast forward to 2020, you have an imam like Omar Suleiman, Allah bless him and protect him and increase him, who has a good grasp of media production, has a good grasp of film production. And this Angel series that he produced this past Ramadan was brilliant. It was really, really beautifully shot. My production crew here in Istanbul, we looked at it, and as media professionals, you're constantly looking at things and equating and comparing. And I had nothing but positive things to say about it. I thought it was really, really beautifully done. And so in an age where you have Muslim scholarship also engaging in the arts, and an entirely new group of artists who have come up in a digital age, post social media. Like, I was learning film by putting a physical film in a camera and cranking it each time I took a shot, and then I would have to wait until I had developed that film. And if I developed it incorrectly, my negatives incorrectly, then I just wasn't going to get a shot. Whereas now, my 8-year-old son knows more about certain technology than I do, right? I'm getting to that age now, but he's growing up with technology where he's making animated films. He's making his own videos with the phone. And so I'm excited about where it's going to go. And I think part of that reason is why I'm focusing a lot of my efforts now on education and on teaching some of the arts, and with a real emphasis in storytelling. Because although I'm excited about the technology and the advances in the technology, I'm not as excited about the ability in storytelling. And so I really want to focus on making sure that is driven home, which is why we're focusing a lot on the training now.
Yeah, mashallah. And I think, it's going in so many different directions. Of course, you have, again, back to the Ba'alawi, you have Nabawi TV in Arabic and full Bahasa Indonesia channels that are 24/7 channels streaming around the world. You have all these Islamic, of course, and we've always had Islamic television channels, but now you have Alchemia as an example, streaming on Amazon Prime, that they're at a point where it seemed like a very difficult proposition, and they've struggled through it, but now they have 300 films that they have on Prime, mashallah, and like some really amazing films like Majidi films and different things like that. But then you also have this proposal recently where the prime ministers of Malaysia, Turkey, and Pakistan were discussing creating an English language station, right? A multi-billion-dollar English language station. Do you think something like that would work? This was a question that was asked of me this past week. I mean, what do you think? Because I think that's the reality of what we're competing against, right? Is we're competing against the Netflix and these huge platforms that they actually do have Islamic content on every platform, on Prime, on Netflix, and everywhere you may look. But how do we compete at a storytelling level?
No, this platform that they're going to create, it's a television channel or more like a Netflix type?
Yeah, well, that would be the question. They had talked about a television channel, and my answer was it should be rooted in California, or you should have an office in California. You should at least be connected to major film studios throughout the world, so you're distributing beyond just that singular platform, and it should be an on-demand platform and not just a TV channel. I mean, but I don't know what you would. I don't know. They're talking about it. They put the idea out there, but at the same time, we had Riyad Minty on with the session about Ertugrul, right, where they're talking about TRT World is now, or TRT is the second largest broadcaster on the planet at this point. So obviously Turkey has a pretty good grasp on what it means to create major media.
And with Riyad Minty's, mashallah, his resume speaks for itself. What he's done in terms of digital media, what he created. And then what he's done here at TRT World as well. I don't know enough about the television industry to really have an insightful answer, an insightful response. I've worked more in the trajectory of an independent filmmaker. I'm not really tied in to the system, so to speak. I've done most of my stuff is privately funded, and so yeah, I just haven't been as tied into the system. But I would say if we're looking, just my best guess or attempt at an answer would be, the mention of TRT. If you're looking at something like TRT and the success of a program like Earthwell, I think, the reason that is successful, and I guess this is conversations that we've had in terms of what we call Muslim media. I think also that needs to be defined. Like, what is Muslim? What do we mean when we say Muslim media? Is Muslim media Muslim themed content, or is Muslim media that's produced by Muslims, or are they one in the same? But a program like Earthwell, I think the reason for success is not just the fact that it's about a Muslim subject or a Muslim topic, but I think the success of it is that it's just a really well done program. It's a really well done show, and I think for the people who watch it from our community, there's a bit of nostalgia and love of it because it's telling our narrative in such a beautiful way, and we're not really used to that. We're used to seeing ourselves as terrorists or criminals when it comes to Hollywood. We don't really have many positive roles in the mainstream film industry. And so I think for us as a Muslim community, we're excited to see Muslims shown in a positive light. However, I think if we're being really blatantly honest with ourselves, I think we would have liked the show even if it wasn't a Muslim narrative, just because it was a show that was well produced. And so if we're gonna do a Muslim television channel or put our energy and focus in that area, I think we just have to focus on just producing really, really quality media. And if I can be really, just be candid for a moment, I think a lot of times we lack in this area. And I've had many conversations with people where we're talking about, Muslim media and the juxtaposition between Muslim media and proselytization. So if people are saying, like, I'm doing this for da'wah purposes, I'm doing this just to spread the khair of Islam, oftentimes there's not as much emphasis on the quality of it. And so sometimes it'll fall short in terms of quality, a great and lofty intention, but the quality of the media that's produced often suffers. And then on the flip side of it, sometimes we have great media producers who are producing great quality, but then, back to your very first question, the spiritual aspects of it are lacking. And so I think there's still, as a community, we haven't got there yet of being able to fuse our creative concepts and our creative ideas with sound spiritual tradition. There seems to still be a disparity. Now, I'm speaking in generalities. There's exceptions, absolutely, 100%. I would never contend that to speak in some sort of system of absolutes. However, I think that at least in general, oftentimes there's a disparity between those two.
Yeah, and that leads to the training conversation. So we want to invite in your sons.
Sure.
And I think the way I would phrase that, and I agree with you 100%, is it's what Sayyid Naqib al-Atas calls the worldview of Islam. That people, you either have people failing at content quality of production, they may not have the skills, or they fail at truly understanding what the worldview of Islam actually is, meaning that they'll give a very Western liberalized understanding of what Islam is to the public. And so that's why the two primary types of content that are out there are essentially, these tropes of Muslim terrorists and the tropes of West. So it's either, or the tropes of Muslims as westernized beings. So it's either other or the same. There's not.
We're completely disenfranchised, and we're bad people, or we're just like you with all of the ills and diseases that you have. We're the same. And so It seems to be these two different factions, unfortunately.
So let's talk now about what you're building in Istanbul, because I agree with you. I think the training component is one of the most important things. And I think you're also doing spiritual training within that media production. So could you just give an overview of your training, and then let's talk about this film On the Ropes, which was one of the first pieces that you all produced with the team that you're training there?
Sure. So we built a studio here in Istanbul. We've been here for about 3 years now. We built a studio here last year, and we started a training program last year, but this was before the studio was built. And my son Mohammed was the very first intern that we had. Now we're calling it officially interns, but both of my sons, Abdullah and Mohammed, have worked with me since they were very young. I've been doing media since they've been alive. And so Mohammed worked on Dean Tight with me on my very first documentary feature. I made a film called Message to Zaire, which was a PBS film about police brutality in the United States. And Mohammed shot a good portion of that film. The same with Abdullah. Abdullah has been shooting photography and learning video editing with me for a number of years. And we just decided that when we got here to kind of formalize it and create a more formal training program. And maybe I could get into details about how we do that, but I think maybe before it's a good point to say that this wasn't their plan. As I was doing media all these years, they would travel with me when I would go. They knew how to set up lights and change lenses and do all this stuff on cameras from the time they were very young. But I think like a lot of young kids, there's a point in your teens where not only do you, where a big part of your program is I just don't want to do what my dad does. I want to do my own thing. I want to make my own mark on the world, and I want to have my own thing. I want to own my own domain. And I was the same way, which I think why I didn't go into business like my father did. I think I just wanted to make my own mark. I wanted to be Mustafa Davis, not just the son of Bill Davis. And so their careers were in fighting. And that might sound strange to some people, but they were both martial artists, kickboxers and MMA practitioners, and really on a fast track trajectory to that being their life. It was all they did every day from the time they were probably about what age?
I started at 10.
At 10.
6.
So 10 and 6 up until
18
and 16. It's all they did. And when I mean all they did, like 4 to 6 hours a day of this. We centered our lives around this. And they're not going to want me to say this, but they did very well. They were advanced. Abdullah was winning in his jiu-jitsu tournaments, and he was just at the space where he was about to start his Muay Thai kickboxing career. Mohammed had a very, very, very strong career. I think you were 11-1. Yeah, he ended up 11-1, and that's temporary because I think they're still going to go back into it. But he was the first amateur to win the WBC belt, and so it was really their entire life. And then we moved to Istanbul to kind of reacclimate and focus on our dean. And then when we got here, they just started helping me more, and then it became something that they started doing kind of on a full-time basis. And now it's become a career path for both of them. And in fact, in terms of training the younger generation, they're my crew now. Like I don't have any other crew outside of my family. Mohammed is married, and his wife Iman also works with us. My daughter Fatima also works with us as well, and they all have positions on the crew, whether they're a producer, a DP, an editor, a designer, depending on the project. But I don't think it was their plan to do it. It was kind of jabran. They were a bit forced into it, but I think they're doing well with it now.
So yeah, but let's talk about that, guys. What was it like growing up with your father in media production, and at what point, I think the film touches on your journey from martial arts. Abdullah and I think Mohammed, you were the DP on it, right? And then talk about the film and talk about what it was like growing from being around it to actually beginning to love media production yourselves.
Well, to be honest, I think I can only speak for me. I know Abdullah has a different experience, but for me personally, like film has just always been in my life. I've never had to kind of like grasp or conceptualize the idea of this is an art. Like it's just always, my life has always had media in it. Even when I was fighting and stuff like that. Like if you ask me to think back on a time like where I was like introduced to a camera, I can't actually tell you. It's always been it's all yeah, it's just it's always been what we've done. I think now the difference is that we've come to see it as an actual art and have come to love it. Whereas before it's just kind of like a part of your life, right? Like you're gonna go on a trip and there's gonna be a camera with you and you're gonna train lighting and you're gonna do all this stuff. Set up some cameras, let dad do his interview. But I think now the difference is that we've come into it a lot more, and we're really loving just the process of learning it and seeing it as an art.
And let's talk about this film, What on the Ropes. I love this film. It's of course part of our short films competition that you can find on our website, globalmuslimlife.com, and under the film festival page you can vote for your favorite films. Mashallah, we have an audience award and you guys are killing it already. Talk about the film, the journey of the film, and so the film tells this, or you guys tell the story of what the film is and why you made it.
I mean, it was really, really just an amazing learning experience, mashallah. You know, subhanallah, I was just telling the story, which is my story and Muhammad's story at the same time, alhamdulillah, about just, you know, us coming to Istanbul, you know, in our life of fighting and how that was our entire life and what it means to kind of, you know, give up something you love a little bit for something that's better.
I think too, it was like, I think it was important for us to tell because it was something that, like full transparency, it was a very raw subject for us for a while, like to the point where, so for us, like my father kind of said, for us fighting was our entire lives, to the point where it was a bit unhealthy in that we couldn't see anything else other than fighting. Like I didn't want to talk about spirituality. I didn't want to talk about Islam. I don't want to talk about education. All I want to do is hit this bag and get a belt around my waist. And I know it's the same for Abdullah. And it really was an obsession. And so for us, the strange thing was that coming to Turkey, I know we talk about Turkey as it's a good thing for us now, but for us at that point, it really felt like our entire being was stripped away from us. Yeah. And it was a lot of resentment. So the story, I think the beauty in it is that it's like it's almost like it's a journal. Like it's really just us projecting. And Abdullah is the star of the story, but it's very much both of our. I mean, it's co-directed with our brother Ibrahim, who's currently in America. But the reason it's being directed by all of me and my brother is that it's basically both of our stories.
It's our story, yeah. And it was really just a kind of, the film itself was a journey of self-discovery. There were a lot of things that I said during the interviews in those films that I didn't have conversations about it. And I think that's why it felt so raw and so real, is because those were just things that had been inside, and then kind of I needed to have conversations about, like, you know, those feelings of like, my dreams are gone, my life is over. And so it was, I think it was in that film, that exact film, in that interview specifically, where I figured out in that moment where I said, I can be a champion in something else.
Yeah, it was very much like we were finding closure while we were making it.
Yeah, and it was not figured out by any means necessarily. Yeah, like, what are we gonna do?
But it's strange to the juxtaposition between how like you feel like everything's being stripped away to being thrown into something that you don't realize is actually life changing and is going to be 10 times better for you than what that previous life track that you're on was. Yeah. Like if you ask us right now if we could choose, like in an ideal world, would you jump back into it where you stay where you are now? I know for a fact both of us would choose to stay where we are right now.
And if we did go back, we know how to do it better, inshallah.
Yeah, mashallah. And I think, you know, we featured another film about fighting in the festival, this series by Will Harris, Anatomy of a Fighter. And Will Harris is such a generous filmmaker and such an incredible filmmaker. And why I love that series is, of course, the film about Khabib Nurmagomedov is about who Khabib is and his deep spirituality and how he was trained by his father to become the fighter. And most importantly, as Will said, what's important about Khabib isn't Khabib as a fighter. What's important about Khabib is who Khabib is as a man. Yeah. And I think that's why people love him around the world. It's just like, to me, it's like Ertugrul, right? People love Ertugrul because here's a sense of true Muslim manliness that we don't see. And Khabib reflects that as well, right? And so I think, mashallah, for you guys in this film, it may have been really difficult for you, especially at a young age, to move to Istanbul, but then you're showing that actually fighting can be a spiritual practice, but it only is that if you're deeply rooted in your own practices.
Absolutely. And I feel like if you look at the two common themes between the two subjects that you brought up, Ertugrul and Khabib, you go back to this concept of mentorship, right? Khabib has his father, and everything that he does, his world championship belt, who he is as a person, is attributed to his father, Ertugrul Ibn Arabi. And I feel like for us, that's what we're gaining here, which was different. Like my father kind of touched on briefly, when we're back in the States, fighting was very much, for us, a means of like finding our own path, but at the same time, like we're kind of distancing ourselves from that mentor. And so I think for us, the difference in the beauty and the love that we found for film is kind of surpasses film itself. It's this idea of apprenticeship that will form you and allow you to grow into the man that you're supposed to be. And I think had we had, like, if you look at Khabib, Ertugrul, any of these great Muslim figures that are still grounded in their faith, we always find that theme of mentorship, right? Like a student with the sheikh. And I think the difference is we're finding that applies to everything, any art form or whatsoever.
Yeah, mashallah. And then let's bring back in Mustafa for this final question. Yeah, thank you guys for the film. Thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for being so vulnerable with the film. I think that's what makes it so powerful. And I wanted to touch on the final theme that I think is in there that we haven't talked about in this film festival, but it's definitely present, is that we've talked to American Muslims who are all over the world, including you all. And I think the film touches on that, this idea of what so many of us are feeling today, and especially those of us who have lived around the world, that there's this global diaspora of American Muslims who've left this place with this sense of, is it worth living here? What am I doing here? What is life for me in this rat race, right? So could you all talk about a bit of that part of the film and what moving to Istanbul has meant to you in your lives?
Heavy question, man. Definitely a really good question. I mean, I think for me, and I'll let Abdullah touch on it as well, but I think for me, it's everything. It's the difference between being whole versus filling yourself with action and material to find some type of feeling of like self-worth. Istanbul for me was difficult, but it's difficult because I feel like anything that is gonna be good for you has to be difficult. But Istanbul really was the first time, like I said, that we had that mentorship to be able to stop and look at ourselves for the first time. In the US, I wouldn't necessarily blame our psyches or our mindset on the environment itself. I think for us, we weren't placed in a context yet where we were ready to look at ourselves. And for us, Istanbul was that. But I don't necessarily feel like it was 100% a result of the place. I think it was a result of the time. I think we had both messed up enough to be able to look back and say, okay, you know what, like we do need to work on ourselves. And that's what we found here. You know, for us, our father has helped us, one, in realizing that an art can translate into cultivating you as a person. And then also to just being able to work on ourselves, which is something that was difficult in the US because we were so immersed in this thing that was just taking up all of our time. Abdullah,
I think it's just, for me, it was just the perspective, you know, not just the perspective on like the whole world in general, and that the world is a smaller place. Like I can remember when you first came, I was like, oh my God, I'm on the other side. I'm on the other side of the world right now, yet the world is still here. So I think it's a perspective on like the world and how it is as a whole, but also like a bird's eye view on yourself when you first got here.
Yeah, because when you're
in all the things that you need to fix, you know, and just once being away from training for a little bit, like, oh no, I have to think about myself now. What am I doing? How do I better myself? So alhamdulillah, I think it was just the bird's eye view of like yourself and what you need to fix. And I think that was the main benefit that I took when I first got here. There, yeah.
You know, for me, you know, I think maybe, you know, now, especially what's going on in the world, most particularly in the United States, is a good time to mention this, is, you know, a good reason why we, and I could talk about being here in Istanbul, but a good reason of why we left in the United States was I have young Black boys, and I didn't want them to be victims or statistics in the United States. And that was a big part of the impetus of why we wanted to kind of make a transition, why we wanted to move. And them in martial arts was also a calculated choice. And again, within the Muslim community, we got a lot of flack for it because Muslims aren't supposed to be fighting, are supposed to punch in the face, and here your kids are doing it semi-professionally. It's all your family's focused on. But for me, it was to keep them busy as young teenagers in the United States, because I was a young athlete. I played soccer, played semi-professionally, and when I was injured in high school and wasn't able to do sports anymore, is when my life went a different direction, and because I wasn't busied with it anymore. And so it's a direction that I didn't want. It's a situation I didn't want my young boys to have to go through. And so part of, I think, coming here in Istanbul, part of the change in thought is your worldview's opened up. Istanbul's a metropolis. There's 15 to 20 million people here, but it's still very much village lifestyle. And so I think for them coming from the Bay Area, having lived in Los Angeles as well, it was like really slow for them. You're walking to the local baker to get your bread, to the local grocer to get your vegetables, and it's a lot of walking that's done here. But I think for the most part, because of the slowdown, distractions were removed. And they were able to keep themselves busy in the United States a lot. And so distractions were removed. And I think now, after being here, if you were to ask them, and you can, do you want to move back to the United States? They're both going to say no. At least not in the moment, because they found a groove here. And for Muhammad, he didn't mention this, but Muhammad also found his wife here. And so he's very happy to be here in Istanbul. And Istanbul at this point was a very great choice for him. And it was the best choice that he could have made. He's not going to mention that part, but that's part of why Muhammad's happy here in Istanbul as well.
Yeah, mashallah. Yeah, that's really deep. I think it's an important conversation to have. I mean, we could have an entire session about that with American Muslims living all over the planet and why they've left. But I think that mashallah, Allah bless you both, and thank you. We look forward to more of your work and for your future films and everything you all are producing with Al Madina. So yeah, we'll go. Let's talk. Let's keep on this thread, Mustafa. Let's talk about more about your films now. Most recently, thank you guys.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Let's talk more. I think you've produced 3 recent films that go deeper into these issues of race in the United States, and now obviously this is a global conversation at this point. So Redneck Muslim, A Message to Zaire, and then now recently you have this series that you're starting with Al Madina. But let's talk first about Redneck Muslim. I think that's part of the conversation that I, as someone who spent a lot of my life studying whiteness, studying white supremacy, it's still a really important part of the conversation, is talking about whiteness and how we transform white people, because we're not going to transform this society if white people aren't transformed, if they don't understand race. So Redneck Muslim is this really beautiful film about our brother Shane Atkinson. Can you talk about the film? And I'll put a link to it while you're talking.
Sure. So Redneck Muslim is a film we did with my good friend Shane Atkinson. It was produced by my dear friend and colleague Jennifer Maturena Taylor, who is a great filmmaker, award-winning filmmaker, and she's an instructor of film at University of Santa Cruz. And so she approached me about making this film with Shane after seeing, I think it was on Facebook, she saw his webpage. I think it was Islamic Society for Muslim Rednecks or something like that. Shane, forgive me if I'm botching that. But that intrigued her, and I had known Shane. Shane and I were friends, and so we messaged him and said, would you be willing to do a film? It was kind of significant that he lived in North Carolina, not far from where the Chapel Hill shootings were, and he was working as a chaplain in a hospital in that environment. And he had said that he was the first Muslim that a lot of people in that environment had ever come in contact with, and he was the chaplain. And he says in the film, he's not the Muslim chaplain, he's the chaplain, so he's going to deal with anybody who has needs for a chaplain there. And so, it was at a time where Trump was I don't remember if he was actually elected yet or if he was on his way to being elected, but that vibe was going on in the United States, and so we thought it would be a good film to make because the title is a bit jarring. It might be a little bit leading, and it's not really what the film is. It's not about rednecks and Muslims. It's about someone who grew up in a racist part of the United States of America in Jackson, Mississippi, ends up converting to Islam, and then is exploring how to keep the good elements of his culture while getting rid of the bad ones, and which was primarily which was bigotry and racism. So this film is a film we did for PBS, and it's an exploration of these values that Shane represents as an individual. I love Shane a lot, and he's someone who mashallah, who really challenges himself and takes himself to account and wants to explore things. And so there's a scene in the film where we went to the African American conference in Atlantic City in New Jersey, and Shane just kind of shows up, and there wasn't many white people there to begin with, but he goes and he's having these very challenging conversations with Black American Muslims about whiteness and about what it means to be white, and even got up on the stage and spoke to an audience that was at least 99% Black American. So that film is a short film. I think it's 13 minutes, 14 minutes, but it's an exploration of that. And I guess I wouldn't necessarily say it, but using your words, it's sort of in a roundabout way an exploration of whiteness and what it means to be white in the United States of America.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful film. Could you talk? Let's touch a bit on some of the differences as a filmmaker of making a film specifically for Muslim audiences, and then making a film about Muslim for a mainstream audience. Because I think that's what's unique about your work also, is that you straddle both worlds, right? You've worked for a lot of Muslim institutions, and then you've now worked for a lot of mainstream. You've made films for a lot of mainstream media publications like PBS.
Alhamdulillah, I think again, because of my path and my entrance into the field of art. First, it was a very personal endeavor as a child, and then it was my teachers in Islam that kind of pushed me in that direction, and that straddling those two worlds in as an art form was never really difficult for me, because I mean, from inception in my life, I've straddled two worlds. Growing up as a Black child in a white family, living in those two kind of at times diametrically opposite existences, that straddling of two worlds hasn't been something that's ever been really difficult for me. It's something that I've had to learn and had to do since I was a young child. And I tend to be pretty candid, so I tend to tell the stories in the same way. Even when I'm telling stories just to a Muslim audience, when they come to telling stories to a predominantly non-Muslim audience, I don't really use apologetics. I don't have an agenda. Again, I'm an American, and I'm sort of, in some ways a quintessential Californian. I grew up, snowboarding. I grew up skateboarding. I grew up in the Bay Area, and so, it's. This isn't something that I've had to think about that often. To be honest, Dustin, it's, I kind of make the films the same way. The only difference really is just where the funding's coming from. If it's coming from a Muslim, oftentimes I'll do films for a Muslim organization, and then there's a marketing aspect to it or a proselytizing aspect to it that they want in the film. And so the real difference is that when I'm making films for mainstream audiences, those kind of stringent parameters aren't there. That's really the biggest difference that I can see.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then let's talk about your film, A Message to Zaire. So yeah. This is part of the PBS film, The Talk, which is playing again on PBS now. It's on the PBS website for streaming right now, because in the context of everything that's happening in the US around this Black Lives Matter. Really beautiful film about this couple in the Bay Area and their son. Could you talk about that film? And you said you had to make that film.
Yeah. Again, this is one I did with Jennifer Maturana Taylor. This was one that we did for PBS for I think Sam Pollard was the producer, who Spike Lee's editor was the producer of this series, and it's a compilation series of I think 6 directors. If anyone's going to watch the film on the PBS website, it's called The Talk. Our segment is the last segment of the film, and there's no title on it. It just says Oakland, California, and it's the story of my dear friend Amir Abdushakur and his wife Nancy and their son Zaire, and it's a story of their son, a beautiful young boy growing up with such wonderful parents, wonderful parenting techniques in the Bay Area in Oakland, California, who at the time wanted to be a police officer. And this is happening right at the crux of kind of the first protests that were going on in the United States because of police, not the first, but one of the protests of the United States, what was going on because of police violence. And so it's the story of how they navigate their lives with their mixed race son. His mother's Latino and his father's Black American. And so, you know, for all intents and purposes in the United States, he's a Black American growing up as a Black American. And he, you know, really wanted to be a police officer. And so the film, I won't give it away because it's a short film again, but it's an emotional film. I actually weep every time I watch the film because of the methods that they have to use as parents to keep their son safe. And you mentioned, why did I have to make this film? I think because, you know, I made a film, you know, the Black American plight has always been something that's important to me. I made a film, that's why I made Dean Type, which is a film exploring hip hop and, you know, the roots of hip hop and Islam. And then I made a film called Prison Blues for an organization, you know, a few years ago, which is about the prison industrial complex with Muslims converting to Islam in prison. But I wanted to make this film because it's such a positive story of Black America. And that's really what I believe Amir and his family represent. And I had already made a film exploring whiteness. And so, you know, just me being who I am in my own racial makeup, I felt that it was a duty to make a film on Black American Muslims as well.
And then finally, let's talk about this recent series that you guys just launched this week with Al Madina about racism.
Mm-hmm. So it's a series of in talk called Studio Sessions that we're going to shoot here in our studio here in Üsküdar in Istanbul. And the first episode of it was one on racism with the founding director of Al Madina Institute, my dear friend and brother Mustafa. And we just had a very candid conversation about race. He and I talk about race quite a bit. He's Palestinian of origin, and I'm Black American, and you know, we've had comparative talks and sometimes debates even about race in America and what race means and what it represents. And he, mashallah, when he saw all the stuff that was going on in the United States, you know, for all intents and purposes, we're living in somewhat a protective bubble here in Istanbul. You know, we're consuming what's going on in America in terms of media, but we're in no way in danger or, you know, or able to participate even in any meaningful way in any of the protests and such. And so he wanted to do something, and he felt that the best way to kind of contribute was to let's just have a real candid conversation like we do off camera. Let's just start having those candid conversations on camera. And so this is a series now where we're going to kind of have unfiltered conversations about very difficult topics, most predominantly concerning the Muslim community.
Yeah, and I think the series is super important, as is all the work, because that's the point we're at in our world, right? Is we have to have these conversations, and I'm part of all these global WhatsApp groups and, you know, whatever, and it's really fascinating to me to see the way that this moment has now sparked conversations about race around the world. But I think that the work can go deeper, right? So even at an institutional level, every institution, even if you're an American Muslim institution and you think that you got race figured out, should have a race and equity initiative within your institution, right? Even the masajid level. Like I saw some of the mosques have already started that, where some of the other mosques, immigrant, you know, led mosques, are like, oh, we're good. And those it's not all good, right? Whereas you literally at the same time have chiefs of police speaking at certain Muslim institutions, I won't name them, in the United States in the midst of all of this happening, right? And so So I think that it's really important to have, you know, people like yourself who make super empathetic, driven storytelling, be able to lead this conversation. And so, you know, I wanted to thank you for your work, and I know it's late there, and everything that you've done, but also wanted to take a minute to talk about, you know, more specifically Al Madina and what you all are doing, and you know, not enough people know of Sheikh Mokhtar Maghrawi, who of course you're there with, and who is kind of leading you all. I was blessed to spend time with him on one of his retreats that he used to do in upstate New York in the Adirondacks, and so could you just talk about what you're doing?
Sure. You know, I've worked for quite a few Muslim, as you know, Dustin, I've worked for quite a few Muslim organizations, individuals and institutions over the last 2 decades. And I think Al Madina Institute stands out. They're really, really amazing organization. Sheikh Mokhtar Maghrawi is the foundational scholar of Al Madina Institute. He's at the helm of their teachings and the way they run the ethos of the organization. There's a reason why a lot of people don't know about Sheikh Mokhtar, and I think that's because of his humility. He's never interested in being pushed out to the public. He's never interested in kind of like the keeping up with the Joneses. So this new phenomenon of celebrity scholarship is not something that he subscribes to. He's a real man of taqwa and a real man of khalwa. He prefers to be by himself with his Lord. And so it's been an amazing opportunity to be here, you know, working with him and under the auspices of Al Madina and the leadership of Sidi Mutasim Atiya. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, especially when we talk about media, you know, if we're having an honest conversation, Dustin, because you've done a lot of media for Muslim organizations as well, sometimes it's a difficult experience to get Muslim organizations to understand what it takes to produce quality media. A lot of times it's a very difficult conversation to have. And so it's exciting to have an organization like Al Madina who has the foresight to say, you know what, let's build a studio in Istanbul. Let's just build a media production studio and let's really do media correctly. And so, you know, they decided that we were going to do this here and start this internship program to kind of create the next generation of media producers. And, you know, mashallah, I can't say, I can't sing their praises enough. Alhamdulillah, it's been a really beautiful experience for me. And as a film producer and creative director and media producer, you know, to have kind of autonomy to do your work under the auspices of a Muslim institution has really been amazing. And so, you know, that's actually part of why, you know, when you wanted to screen the film my boys co-directed, and they co-directed it with their friend and another intern of ours, Ibrahim Suada, who had to return back to the United States because of the COVID crisis. He had to go back and take care of his mother there. But the reason why when you asked me who directed the film, why we didn't really have an answer for you was that part of our internship program here is that we're not going to put names on anything that we do. We're gonna just work as a team. And so whatever we do is going to be produced as Al Madina Studios. We're not going to put our names on it. And part of that is that part of the training is to get us away from this kind of this self-promoting environment that is social media, where before you're done with your training, you're already getting praised on oftentimes mediocre work. And so to remove that from the interns, we were just going to put stuff out as a crew. But because you needed it for this particular project, we decided that we're going to make them all co-directors. Part of the way we run the studio here, part of the training program, is to make sure that we don't have a separation between, I guess this goes back to your very first question tonight, we don't have a separation between the art and the spirituality, that it's all infused. Like the religion and the creative work aren't something separate, where we're not doing our work in media and compromising our ideals as Muslims, and then you know, going and doing religion after. The goal here, and this was really kind of infused by Al Madina themselves, was to kind of create this fusion between the two, the symbiosis between spirituality and creativity. So we start our mornings, we kind of quasi clock in, and then the first half an hour on the clock is spent in silent dhikr, reading Quran, doing your weird, doing review in your Islamic sciences studies, and that's on the clock. So that's your first half an hour. We have downstairs in our studio area, we have a masala area where everyone sits individually and just starts our day remembering Allah and focusing on Allah, making our intentions for the day. And then we also have a philosophy of rising and falling together as a team. So we don't call anyone out for a mistake. If there's a mistake that happens, we figure out how do we make this happen as a team, and how do we get beyond it as a team. And so, we're training, inshallah, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, like they say in Arabic, faqidu shay la ya'ti, right? The one who doesn't possess something can't give it. And so, we're training with the hope that the possessor of these traits, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, is the one who grants them this, because we ourselves don't embody these principles ourselves in any meaningful way that we're trying to teach. But the goal is to create media professionals that are creating at a very high level of production value, so that when anybody sees it, Muslim or non, will say this is the quality level of production, but then also that the spirituality is infused in it, so that there's no separation, so that we don't have media that is good, it looks good in terms of the production value, but it misses the mark in terms of the spiritual values, or that there's great spiritual values in it, but it misses the mark in terms of the production value. And so we're really relying on this next generation to kind of build on the storytelling that was set by those that came before them, and to take it to the next level, inshallah ta'ala.
Inshallah, that's beautiful, and I think that's really what we have to do right now. Is we have to train everyone and build teams, because I just think the narcissism of YouTube, of Instagram influencers, and literally I'm growing so tired of the content, right? The YouTube content, the Instagram content, where it's the same thing over and over again. And I feel like hopefully we're at its peak, just like, reality TV back in the day, where at some point there, in the 90s and late 90s, early 2000s, there was nonstop reality TV programming, and then it kind of began to filter off. But literally it's just cut and paste content that people are trying to use to grow following. Of course, with social media, you can literally buy your following by buying likes. And
well, we need to change our benchmark for success, right? Our benchmark for success right now is based on fame, and the more followers or likes you have, or whatever people call it today, that social capital is what determines whether or not you're good. And so if you have 100,000 followers or 1 million followers, then very clearly you're good. But this is not the correct benchmark, because if I look at my mentors, and my mentors I could work my entire lifetime or 2 lifetimes and not get to the level that the people that I call mentors have gotten to in terms of their artistic ability and their creative ability. But if you look at their social media followings, I don't think most of them don't even have social media, and those, some of them, even though they're award-winning filmmakers, they're not known. They're not like famous. They're not what we would call influencers. And so I think what's happened now, when the benchmark for success ceased to be quality work and started to become fame, what happens now is that we trust the numbers of fame, but we don't trust the work itself. And so someone could have great, just like the best film or photo or painting ever, but if they don't have a strong social capital, strong social media following, people aren't going to take them serious. And then the opposite of that applies, is that someone who has a strong social media following, they could, for all intents and purposes, create very mediocre or subpar art and still be praised and hailed as a great. And that's based on the numbers, not based on the quality. And so that's, we talk about that a lot here as a crew. If we produce something that our mentors say is great, and the public just doesn't have a taste for it because it doesn't meet 140 characters, or it's longer than 3 minutes with a bunch of jump cuts and After Effects and these things, as long as our mentors and those who've kind of created the standards that we're striving for like it, then for us that's good enough. Similarly, if we do something, we try to take the path of a relationship with the sheikh and a student and apply it to ourselves in the art as well. So similarly, if we did something and the masses were pleased with us or impressed with us, but our sheikh or our mentor or our teacher was upset with us, we're going to go with that as the truth. And so likewise, if we do something and our mentors and our teachers are pleased with us, but the masses don't necessarily accept it, that's not what our goal is. Our goal isn't fame. And you know, I talk to my kids. I'm pointing because they're still here with me in the room. But we talk about fame a lot. You know, at one point, you know, in my career, that was my push. Was that, you know, I believe that as well as a young, you know, artist. If you push and get known and make yourself known, that's how you become significant, and that's how you get the bigger budgets, and that's how you make a name for yourself, and that's how you can create great art. And I think I earned some of that I call it quasi success, because I don't believe it's real. But I earned some of that, and my life wasn't better. I wasn't a better artist because of it, and bigger budgets didn't come. It just became me chasing my own tail and my own fame, trying to keep up with the Joneses and trying to make a name for myself. So my art became the art of promoting myself, the art of marketing myself, where my own art, the actual art itself, suffered. And so, you know, and if we're going to have a fully transparent conversation, part of coming to Istanbul wasn't just for my boys themselves, but it was a reset for me artistically. And I ended up leaving social media for a few years because of it. I got ahead of myself. I started feeling myself. I had some notoriety, and I made mistakes in that. And some of those mistakes are mistakes that I wouldn't want a younger generation to make, just in getting caught up in feeling yourself and then really producing subpar work and then making excuses for it because you have a level of notoriety that backs it. And so we're taking the opposite approach here. We're doing work for our mentors and for the art critics. And inshallah, there's acceptance of it from the masses, and it's something that people can engage with. But at the end of our careers, we want to have a body of work that means something, and not just a body of work that got us notoriety and fame.
Yeah, because I mean, it's media for the sake of nafs, otherwise, right? And it's not for the sake of Allah. And I think it goes.
If religion is involved, Sidi. If religion is involved, it's easy to justify.
No. Exactly, and we have to be clear with our intentions. Where our intentions with our work as media producers, and that goes from, like I said at the beginning, that piece I mentioned. I think I might not have mentioned this on the stream, but there's a really beautiful article with Mahershala Ali and Rami Youssef talking about this season of Rami that Mahershala Ali is in, and he'll probably win an award for it as a supporting actor because he's that good, and he plays the Sheikh Ali. And in the article, I think that Amir Suleiman wrote part of it, and he's almost written as if he's Amir Suleiman. For those of us who know Amir, mashallah, he's a beautiful character to write into a television show. But it's through Mahershala Ali's authenticity as an actor. And they ask him, Rami Youssef asks him in the article, how do you do it? You know, how do you act this beautifully in everything you're in? And he said, I pray. I pray before I start anything, and then I ask Allah to facilitate and my work and make it authentic. And it's amazing to see someone who's at that level show that that's what he's doing. And he also talks about it in a really candid way, that he also said from the beginning of his career, when he started his career, he converted to Islam and started acting 6 months after that. And then he made it very clear that he wouldn't do any sex scenes to his agents, and they told him he'll never be a leading man. And he said, well, at that point I said, well, if I become a leading man, then I'll know that the existence of Allah is real.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. And I think that's important to point out, especially for young artists who and you know this, especially working with young filmmakers who feel in order to make it, at some point they're going to have to compromise their ideals as a Muslim to make it. And I say, and a lot of my peers, that we talk about this, that if you have to compromise your ideals to make it, then you call it something else, because that's not making it if you're a Muslim. And some of my mentors in the arts and friends who are the greatest at what they do, and they're Muslims, haven't compromised. So you look at a Peter Sanders, who's a master photographer, and he spent his career photographing masters of the Islamic spirituality, of the Islamic sciences. he hasn't compromised his ideals. He hasn't compromised his religion. He doesn't downplay it or water it down in order to have success in his career as an artist. Yusuf Islam, Cat Stevens as well. You know, he's in 2 Hall of Fames, in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Singer-Songwriter Hall of Fame. And same, you know, he's a man of principle, and it's gotten him in trouble in the past. His principles have gotten him in trouble in the past. And you know, and I would say, you know, my dear friend and beloved brother Amir Suleiman, who's also a master at what he does. There's no compromise in his religion. There's no apologetics in his religion. And there's many of them. Brother Ali, also someone who there's no apologetics. He's working mainstreaming. He's explicit about his art. You know, for myself, even as a young artist, there was a time I thought in order to make it, you have to leave the Muslim community and go work mainstream, and then that'll be celebrated, and then you could get accepted by the Muslim community. You know, and this was me as a young artist, and I no longer see that as success. You know, if you're doing it and Allah is actually the creator, and you're just a tool that Allah is using to do his creativity, to do his ibdat through you, then to do it in a way that's displeasing to Allah is not success, and it's not a way to get continued or longevity in your success.
Yeah, exactly. And tonight we have a session on, or in about, I guess, 6 hours, we have a session on global Muslim music videos. And one of the people we're featuring in that is one of the most famous Malaysian rappers, one of the most famous rappers in Southeast Asia, this brother named Ultimate, who's a really beautiful brother, you know, millions of social media followers. Like, his YouTube videos have millions and millions of views. He has this one incredible video that's an animated video, really beautifully done. And the entire thing is about usury and capitalism. And so basically Islamic content, but doing it in a super relevant way for the mainstream. And then he goes and he retired at the height of his game, and he went and bought a farm in outside of Kuala Lumpur, and he now is farming. So, you know, mashallah. I mean, there's people like this, and they're incredible people that Allah has given great favor to, obviously, and that are very serious about their craft. And so we need the artists, and we pray that that's what this film festival has done, has featured, you know, the artists around the world and shown our degree and level of talent. And we take from you as a teacher, and we thank you again, and we thank Muhammad and Abdullah. May Allah bless you and allow you to exceed, you know, your father's greatness, inshallah. They're coming back.
They're gonna come back and say bye.
Yeah. Thank you all for staying. I know it's late there.
Alhamdulillah. It's our pleasure, Sidi. You know, this is a great initiative that you're doing. You know, we as well ask Allah to give it success. You're creating a platform for young filmmakers to be able to show their work. Like, for example, now their work is in your festival. You know, and so these are important for them, young artists, to know that they have a place within the Muslim community to create high quality, high production value art that's going to be cherished and is going to be honored and accepted.
And there's no reason why this shouldn't exist, right? We have Latino film festivals, African American film festivals that have gone on for 30, 40 years running, right? But yet there's not one globally focused Muslim film festival, despite the level of content. And so we pray that we're able to really represent, you know, and have a beautiful view of what the young people are producing. So again, you can check out On the Ropes is on our short film part of our website, and inshallah we'll see you guys back for the award ceremony. And if next weekend is the final weekend of the film festival. So jazakallah khairan. We'll see you all soon, inshallah. We pray for you. Keep us in your prayers. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
All right, we are